Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this session of the U.S. Artist International Professional Development Series. My name is Andrew Olnith Olson, and I'm Program Director International at Mid-Atlantic Arts. I'm a white man in my 30s with blonde hair, round brown glasses. I'm wearing a blue dress shirt and a blue button-up sweater, and I'm sitting in front of a blank white wall. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm joining the call today from Minneapolis, Minnesota, the traditional and ancestral lands of the Dakota people. As we get started, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and where you're joining the call from. Today's session is designed for early to mid-career musicians looking to take their work abroad. You'll have a chance to hear some stories and lessons learned from our two guests who've made international touring part of their ensemble work. Before I introduce Ben and Delbert, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. First, we do have closed captioning being provided today. Thank you to our captioner. You can access the English captions by clicking the CC button in the Zoom menu, and Spanish captions should be available at the link and QR code on the screen. And I'll drop that in the chat too. We're also recording this session and we'll be making it available on YouTube later, likely early next week. And then after the session today, you will receive an email with a short survey about today's session. I'd appreciate if you can just take a moment or two to fill that out. Next, we do want this session to be interactive. So if you have questions at any point during the session, if one of our guests says something that you want to follow up on, please feel free to submit a question in the chat. We'll respond to some of those questions on the fly, and we'll try to get to all remaining questions at the end of the call. Lastly, we opted to hold this call as a Zoom meeting, and so we just ask that you remain muted throughout the call until we get to that Q&A section. After the Q&A, we will have the opportunity to open up some breakout rooms for you to network with attendees in small groups and discuss a few prompts about international touring. I also want to say thank you to the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation, who is making this series possible. With that, I'm pleased to introduce our panel today, Ben Melsky and Delbert Anderson. Ben, would you mind just giving us a brief overview of you, the organization you work with, and your international touring history?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks so much for being here. My name's Ben Melsky. I use he, him pronouns. I have round brown glasses, brown hair, and I'm wearing a gray hoodie. Um, I am the executive director and also harpist of a contemporary music ensemble. It's based in Chicago called Ensemble Niente. I play in the group, of course, and I also do all of the administration with a relatively small staff. So we put on concerts in Chicago, about 5 to 8 per year, and then we tour the rest of our season, which is usually about 15 to 20 concerts in any given season. We travel abroad maybe 1 or 2 times. Um, we have 26 musicians in the group, and we have been recently to Mexico City. We've been to Toronto. We have been to Hong Kong, Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo. We've been to Berlin. And this summer we are probably going to Vienna and also Sofia in Bulgaria.
Thanks, Ben. It's really great having you here today. Delbert, please introduce yourself too and share a bit about your international touring background.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Delbert Anderson. I am from Kirtland, New Mexico. I go by he, him pronouns. I am wearing black frame glasses, have brown skin, wearing a green wool hat, and wearing a maroon shirt. My work falls in the sort of jazz idiom. I have a jazz quartet that has foundations in indigenous melodies, particularly like my culture. I am Diné Navajo from the Navajo Nation, and I have been touring now for about 13 years. Been to countries such as like India, uh, London, South Asia, New Zealand, Canada, and also work within sort of other groups as well that have indigenous backgrounds. And so I'm very happy to be here and excited to continue this conversation.
Thanks, Delbert. So as we get started, I think I'd like to start with kind of your first international tour experience, how your ensembles first got that invitation to tour internationally. Because I hear from a lot of folks who just wonder, like, how do you get that first invitation to perform abroad? So if you could just both share, what were you, how did you translate what you were already doing in the US into that first international opportunity? Where did that invitation come from? And what kind of work did you need to put in to cultivate that opportunity?
Uh, Sorry, Delbert, do you want to go first?
Oh, yeah, I'll go first. So being a musician and doing sort of cultural work, one of the things that pushed us into sort of the international market was going to these booking conferences. There are two that I definitely live by. I'm always going to Western Arts Alliance, which is, I believe, on the West Coast area. They sort of bi-yearly go to different West Coast cities West Coast states, but I believe they're housed in Portland, if I'm not mistaken. And the other is the Association of Performing Arts Professionals, APAP, which is in January, in New York City, every January every year. And these are basically booking conferences where you can network with not only those within the United States, but there are also presenters and different touring routers, agents, and managers who help connect the dots overseas. And so my very first tour experience was actually through an executive director named Catherine McVickers, who runs Music Works International. It just took a few moments meeting her and telling her about my work. And my very first sort of overseas experience was going to the WOMAD Festival in South Africa. And so uh, she had been working on tours with the WOMAD series that happen, on different continents and so forth. And so she was sort of my in. As soon as I began to get out there, other opportunities began to form around, that specific festival. Um, so, I mean, for me, it's definitely the networking phase and getting into these conferences that have, that have all the right people that are searching for specific talent wise. I sort of have a little niche being more cultural, so a lot of the things that I offer are with Diné culture, Diné melodies, Navajo melodies, Navajo culture. Therefore, it was, the WOMAD festival celebrates all different cultures. So that was sort of my in into the international touring market. After word was out that we performed the WOMAD festival, it sort of led to many more opportunities. But I would definitely check with these two booking conferences. They're where artists meets, what we call presenters. But it's not only presenters, but there are many different arts organizations that are there that can offer many different opportunities and resources. So that's how I've got into the international market.
Thanks, Delbert. Great, great recommendation there. What about you, Ben?
Um, I'm going to echo a lot of things that Delbert said and sort of take in a little bit of a different direction. So, my ensemble, Del Niente, is one in which a lot of the music that we play is international kind of in scope and from a lot of different composers from around the world. So, we do things like go to conferences like APEP, um, But our luck in terms of international touring has come through primarily just forging pretty close individual connections with people in different markets, essentially. And it's very helpful that the repertoire that we have kind of speaks to different markets. Um, so my ensemble Del Niente has been around for we're our 20th anniversary season right now, and I've been the executive director for 10 years. So the very first international gigs that the group went on, I was not in charge at the time, but I will talk about the first ones that I did do. So the first one I did do was in Mexico City. This would have been 2018. And this was a connection that we cultivated over kind of a long amount of time and from different kind of directions. So there was a gentleman who was at a festival who also happened to be a composer whose music we played, and we started a conversation this way. The conversation sort of ramped up and eventually became turned into kind of an opportunity to visit the festival that sort of built out with other projects that we had going on. And so eventually that led to an appearance at this festival in Mexico City, which then basically kind of established those connections and then led to revisit that festival later on and further connections with other composers as well. Um, when we have gone to all these other places, it's a similar flavor in that there's one or two people that we've gotten to know very closely, either through kind of the close knit network of composers. So a lot of composers are people who, for example, might come through Chicago and then go somewhere else and either work or spend some time or teach or something like that. And then whatever relationships we build here at home will often sort of create opportunities in other places. We because the music that we play is a fairly niche market, we have to be really specific about which types of presenters and festivals we're targeting, and also try to find the interest with the specific individuals additionally. So it's helpful, for example, if a composer we know also happens to have a position in which they are directing a festival or a particular series. That's usually our best bet for getting some of our international touring projects going.
And yeah, I think just I would highlight from both of your responses like the importance of those relationships and especially like knowing your particular market and who abroad can be making those connections for you and being an advocate for you and your work. Um, I guess I'm also interested in some of the complications that you might run into in an international tour, that touring outside the US, especially depending on which part of the globe you're touring in, might lead to, um, additional difficulties that you might not run into when touring regionally or nationally. So what are some of the hard lessons that you learned while touring abroad? Feel free to share a quick story or anecdote. And Delbert, why don't we start with you if you don't mind?
Yeah, I think something that is very uh, considering difficulties. I mean, I feel that one of the most important things is having like an emergency fund. Obviously, it's going to be higher than the ones that you have in the state when you're touring in the state, but internationally. A good example is when we were headed to Kolkata, India. We were stuck in Doha for 24 hours, and in Doha, they have certain rules. You're not allowed to stay in the airport, over a certain amount of time. So we had to get out and get a room, and some of these things were not really prepared for. And so that was like an expense we had to take. And of course, we were calling the venues and everything and letting them know what happened. But internationally, missing a flight is it's kind of a nightmare. And most of the time, it takes a day or two to rebook. And so, just incidents like such, I feel like not only. Uh, sort of being prepared in the places that you're visiting, the places that you have layovers. It's really good to kind of look up culturally what are the what's appropriate in those areas, because Doha was a little different story. And we had no idea where we were in. Of course, we weren't supposed to stay there, but we had to stay there for about a day and a half. And so, kind of looking up on those things of getting prepared in that way. uh, it's not only just focusing on the city that you're going to be in, but I would also kind of look at the layover strategies and really get into planning on what happens if we miss a flight, or we have to stay in a whole different country, because it was a nightmare figuring out immediate visas to stay there over 24 hours and things like that. So all of these things start coming into play, and it's you really can't you can try to plan for everything, but it seems like there's always something that kind of sneaks by. And so, part of it is experience, but I'm glad it happened because now, I kind of know what to do in those situations. But that's just, one country. I'm pretty sure they have a little different story in others. So, if anything, I would definitely look at all of these places where you have layovers and where the gig is, especially cultural customs, like what is good and bad, and because some of these places, like such as Kolkata, India, I mean, they still have separate male and female lines when you go into the airport. And so it's, smaller cities are very religious, so you have to be very careful when, handling yourself in those areas. And same with, being stuck in Doha, so Qatar, and so I had to jump on. Luckily I had Wi-Fi, and I jumped on Google and quickly started researching as we were going, because that wasn't expected. But so I would definitely really push. The planning is a lot more than you would in the United States, and also because the United States is very open, and almost every state has a tourist attraction. A lot of the rules are very there's not that many rules here, but when you head out into these countries, especially smaller cities, um, the like religion and all of these things are a huge part of their culture, to where you would really have to be careful in some of these areas. So that's some of the advice I would give on that.
Yeah, planning ahead, having that emergency bucket is huge for those unexpected things because anything and everything can and will happen on an international tour. Ben?
Yeah, I'm gonna I have a different angle on this. So one thing I want to talk a little bit about was just the difficulties of just like getting your foot in the door with an international presenter or festival. Um, I think one of the hardest things, perhaps the hardest part of the process, is like getting that initial interest from a presenter and then maintaining that interest over the course of a conversation. Um, because we can all send cold emails, but a lot of the presenters that you're reaching out to get hundreds of these emails every day. And so you have to stand out somehow, and usually that comes down to some way of getting another person, or you being at the festival in person to actually make a connection with this presenter that you're trying to attract. Um, just have a face to a name, have somebody else put your name in front of that person. These are all strategies that we use to kind of like get somebody to really pay attention to our work. Um, and then it can be difficult to maintain that attention. So one thing is like we might start an initial email conversation, but then a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, you don't hear anything. So then it's a process of sort of following up. Is this going to happen? Is this not going to happen? That can be very difficult as well. I think another thing which is really important to consider is timing. So like and by timing I mean how far in advance are some of these presenters and festivals actually booking. In our experience, if when we're traveling to Mexico, when we've been getting to Brazil and Argentina, it's a shorter timeline. So it's like if a festival happens in October, then the best time to contact them is like in December, and then decisions will be made like in March or April, and then that will be for the next October. So it's a really short time frame. Whereas when we try to work in Europe, the time frame is at least a year, probably 2 years in advance. So knowing when to contact somebody about something is also a really big part of the equation. It's not like that. Just like everybody's different too, so it's hard to know exactly when is the right time to make that initial contact. Um, and then it's also one thing that we have noticed too is that when you're performing internationally, the pool of people that you are competing for those slots is much bigger too. So you have to kind of sell your work in a different way, and you have to think about what is going to make you appealing to this presenter as opposed to a much bigger pool of people. And one thing that it does come down to is uh, there are other countries where there is a lot of institutional funding for performances. So on a festival, you might see a group from Germany, or you might see a group from the UK or something like that, and a lot of those organizations can acquire support from their different institutions to travel as well. So you might be competing against groups that have a lot of um, that kind of support behind them. So that can be difficult, and I think it's just managing all of those different pieces of information um, within the kind of workflow that you have as an artist. So those can be some difficulties. Um, yeah. Anyway, we could also talk about logistics, but I'll leave it. Put a pin in that for now.
Yeah, I really appreciate that point. Ben, in those timelines, right, they're often very regionally specific, and it's great to start figuring that out, especially if there's a unique, like if you really want to be dedicated to growing your market in a specific part of the globe, figuring out what those ground rules are, not rules, but those general, things that most presenters, the general time scale that most of those presenters are working in. Delbert, did you have anything? I wasn't sure if you were gonna unmic there and respond at all. No pressure.
Yeah, and usually, I mentioned the two conferences that I go to. Most of those conferences you're booking for next year. Very rarely you'll get a, you know, so to say, a gig within that same year of that conference, but it's very rare. And so, I kind of like to say it's a long-term game, and definitely because it depends on the relationship. The relationship depends on, quite honestly, what type of person you are. And if you're a nice person and you're outgoing, you appeal to those to the presenters as just people. But if you have like slight anger, or if your face doesn't read well, it all matters when you come into that network and making a relationship. Also, I think we both mentioned it. We both have Ben and I both have a unique niche, or where there's something that kind of sets us apart than what everyone has to offer, and I think that has a lot to do with it. Not only being that, but just pure talent in general. Like you have to talent is a must. And I kind of saw one of the questions down there about the friends. Something that I feel like every art artist needs is a mentor. And they also should be striving to get lessons with others that they like, and so that they can start to really build this foundation of that way. Talent is not a problem, and talent you would always have, but something that is very difficult to do is harnessing that talent into your own art form. And that's when it begins to really, that's when you begin to have a selling point. Because I play trumpet, and there are tons of trumpet players out there. I'd probably score myself 35% on a scale of 100 compared to everyone else. But I have a unique in with what I do with the trumpet, and it's tied to my culture, and it's something that I can say for myself. And so therefore it kind of puts me a little ahead in this universal market. So I mean, there are ways to do it, but I would really focus on those points. But yeah, I wanted to mention that it is a sort of a long-term thing, and if you're thinking internationally, it should definitely be thought about and gone around how you should have a sort of goals and a pathway that you want to follow with, a few, maybe two or three options if that fails.
Yeah.
Because most of the time you're going to run right into a failure immediately. And so, you have to have these, uh, I wouldn't say failure. You just have to find a different avenue or different path for it. And that can be a little difficult and sometimes scary if you're looking right at it. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
With that long view for international, I do think it's important to think about and talk a little bit about the financial picture of what it looks like to tour internationally, because it's really hard, it's really expensive. So I guess I'm interested if, Delbert from more of the individual artist perspective, Ben from more of the organizational perspective, like what's your thought process when considering whether a proposed international engagement is worth it when you factor in the fees and the other expenses that it's going to take to make that possible? Because most of the time, the fees you're making from a festival or other performance abroad won't necessarily cover all of your expenses, especially if it's your first time getting on the international stage. Like, how are you thinking about those invitations and deciding whether it's worth that risk? Yeah,
Um,
Ben, why don't you go first?
yeah, we think about this a lot. So, as Andrew alluded to, and thank you for mentioning this, because I think it's really important to know that there are some gigs for which they're going to pay for everything and it'll be great. There are some gigs for which they're going to pay for like half, and you have to figure out where the other half comes from. Um, it would be great if every gig you wanted to do was the type of gig that could pay for absolutely everything, but that's not really the case, at least in my organization. So when we have toured internationally, we have always needed to find additional resources to help accomplish everything we want to do, because the presenter usually has interest, but maybe not always the financial means for our group in particular. So we do have to make this calculation pretty consistently throughout the year of whether or not we are willing to put in some of our own resources into this concert. Um, with my organization, we have we have general operating, we have earned income, we have grants. We have a few different levers that we can pull when we need to find additional resources. We also have a sort of a bank of individual funders. Bank is sort of a funny way to say it, but a bunch of individual funders who like to get behind certain projects as well. Um, so we have at least a few different angles when we need to find additional resources. I would say the biggest determining factors are like what type of festival it is. If it's the kind that is going to have a good following, a good crowd, that's usually a really great indicator that this is a market that we want to have, either want to sustain a relationship with or that we want to enter for the first time. Um, there are some presenters that we have worked with which are like they're not necessarily based in the city where they are producing a show. They're like maybe um, based in a different country, but they happen to do a program in that other place and they rent the hall. That usually means that they don't have necessarily a really built-in following. And so when we'll take in that to consideration as well. So there have been a few times when we have done a concert like that, and it's like we have this great hall, we have this good program, and there's not a lot of people there. It's because they just didn't have the same way of marketing exactly what we were doing. So that's one part of the consideration. Um, Almost every time we have played somewhere, the most the biggest impact has always come from what we can bring back. Because a lot of times when we go places, we will work with students, we will work with local composers, and we will always find a piece of music, a composer we really like, something like that. And so we try to also make sure that when we are spending our own resources on these concerts, that there is at least a pretty high potential for us to be able to bring something back that we have learned. Um, and so that often means like we've got something built in where we're going to do a workshop with composers, where we're going to do an outreach thing. And so if those elements are missing, then that's a reason that we might not necessarily do a gig. And if they're missing, we try to build them in somehow to make it worthwhile. So there's just a few different parameters that we're thinking about that question, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Delbert, for you, individual musician, you've got an ensemble, but you don't necessarily have that nonprofit administrative back-end support, that pool of funders that you can lean on. When you get these invitations, what's your thought process on whether it's worth taking it up, taking that risk, potentially seeking some of your own money into it? I don't know what's your thought on that?
Yeah. So, for the individual artists, those who are just completely doing it by themselves, um, for me, it's a budget, and I recommend if everyone, if no, if someone here does not, if they're not living on a budget, I'd recommend getting one and doing it because it really shows you the numbers of your living, your like basically your living expenses. And when I say budget, I don't mean like you have to live the lowest possible way. Budgeting basically just means allocating certain monies to a certain thing and making sure that you stay true to that plan. But I say that because that's sort of for me as an individual artist that's what really makes me decide is this worth it or if it's not worth it. I guess a great example is um, we were invited to Venice last year, and it seemed like only half the trip was paid for. It was something like we had to pay for travel on ourselves, but everything was that. But the take home afterwards, and this I'm talking about a band situation, a quartet was probably about 1,200 each. But we would be gone for about 2 weeks. And, when I look at the take home of, what Ben was mentioning, the take home was around $1,200, and I input that into my budget and kind of basing it off of other regional gigs that I had. I could stay home and be home more. And actually come back with 2,000 rather than 1,500 and being gone for 2 weeks. So it's a really great way when you have a budget that you just input it, and if it's going to push you forward, uh, like if your rent or whatever it is, mortgage, if all those living expenses are covered and you don't have a problem with it, I would say go for it. But back to Ben's point, there is a point also on what type of festival, but it these decisions are made due to kind of your career path. I wouldn't take if it were just like, oh, we have this opportunity, let's just do it because it's international. There's other things that kind of go into play when thinking about an international opportunity. One is will they consider inviting you back? The other is who can I network with there? Are there people that can come see this performance that can launch me off? So it's more of a networking question too, and what they have to offer in terms of collaborating with different entities or organizations. But if it was just sort of a one-off thing, I would be very careful because I know we all, as artists and artists that are just beginning to try and tour internationally, it's really fun to just think of the idea of, wow, an international opportunity, I better go do it. But there's a lot more to it. And it should be according into like a plan that you already have for your career path. And so it's a little the scenarios are always going to be different, and the state of the artist at that point is always going to be different, like financially even. But there are some help out there, like Ben mentioned grants. There are some grants available that can help. I would definitely look into, if you're thinking of going abroad, definitely see what or other organizations are involved and sort of do your pitch of what else you can offer. Not only just say a performance, but we're in healing and wellness, we're in education. Are there any opportunities with that? And usually, that sort of shifts the funders to where the festival doesn't have to pay you, but the institution will pay you, or the medical field will pay you to do certain things. So there are ways to do that, but you have to know those people. And I think it's important that if you're gonna do an international gig, you should make some time to be networking and meeting these people face to face because like Ben said, they get tons of emails and but they'll remember if they see someone. So it's really important to just put your best foot forward and network while you're at these opportunities. So if those opportunities were there and the living situation was covered, it would be something I would take. But I would be very cautious in just sort of jumping in just because it's a gig and just because it brings some type of money home. Everything has to fit the budget, basically. Yeah.
Definitely. It's a hard decision that everyone has to make on their own, depending on their own situation. I next want to pivot into kind of cultural awareness. You've both, through your organization or ensemble, taken work abroad several times. That sometimes means performing your work in a context that might be very different from what you're used to in the US. So I'm wondering how you prepare yourself or your collaborators for cultural differences on the ground, whether that's communication styles, audience behavior, etc.
Um, I'll jump in with like communication styles. um, so this is a big one. So like email is like a default, I think, for a lot of U.S. presenters, but many times when I am communicating with somebody not in the U.S., I'm on WhatsApp, and that is often a way I have relied on that to help uh, do all kinds of logistics and coordinate things in a way that email just never worked. Um, so I do think that like there's a really big learning process with this, which is like if you are not getting anywhere with a particular type of communication style, it could just be that you're in the wrong channel. Basically, you're like on the wrong wavelength, and I have found that that has been the case many times. It also could be the case like you're dealing with people who have different like holidays and like work-life balance structures than we have in the U.S. Um, Different time zones. So like every when we went to Hong Kong, all of my conversations with people there were either very early in the morning or very late at night. Um, so it was just being kind of willing to learn about how to put yourself in a position where you can be easy to contact with the people that you want to be paying attention to you. And I think that was one big takeaway, certainly in years of doing this.
Thanks, Ben. That's so right. A lot of my work, since I run grant programs that are international, happens on WhatsApp, 100%. Emails will not be responded to nearly as often, but WhatsApp, you'll get a response right away, but sometimes. Delbert, what about you?
Yeah, I could definitely speak to sort of like the cultural sensitivities of some of these countries and how it sort of changes the delivery and my the art that we make. And it's I think one thing is just recognizing and um, knowing and agreeing that we are not in our home space. We are in someone else's home space. And so so being very polite and sensitive to whatever culture and religions that you run into. A great example is again in India. I feel like it was a place that was a lot more where I had to be a lot more sensitive with the things that we deliver and say, and what we promote as indigenous people. We were in Kohima, I believe, and it's a very cultural, very religious area. And, a lot of times I would take the time to explain the stories of some of these songs. However, they are very heavy in indigenous belief systems, such as like concerning creators and how you conduct your life and all of these things. So we made a decision to leave those things out because we just didn't want the trouble or cause any kind of conflicts with the audience that was there. We were sort of prepped from the embassy. The embassy helped set up that sort of relationship in that presentation, and they did make us aware of things to not really say and speak to. And I know for artists it's like, I'm going to be me, I'm going to do me, but remember, we're not in our home anymore. So it was very important that uh to really be cultural sensitive to some of these areas that you visit. Because what you think is just a performance might not be, custom to some of these the people that you run into. And so it's something that could really make or break you on your international tour. If you something does go wrong, it will be remembered, and you probably won't get the call back. So, but the other thing too was dealing with embassies. I think some of the embassies, they have really good networks, especially along like education. They know the people who can help you like teach abroad, and also like if you just want to be like sort of a teacher or a educator in residency, they help really well with those things and can give you the contacts. It'd be very difficult to try and find those on your own. I would start off with like probably someone who works with an international, like something like an embassy would do really well. On all our tours, we were able to go in schools and to teach like a music class internationally. So it was very easy once you have the foot in the door to ask for those contacts, and they usually happen. Education seems to respond very quickly in terms of performing and different things like that. But those things, I think another thing that we weren't really aware of was sort of the language barrier sometimes. So on our tour, especially in Kohima, we were given a translator and also like a liaison officer who was just following us everywhere in case someone had a problem with us. The liaison officer would explain, that these guys are on a U.S. embassy tour and so forth. Because really, some of these places that you visit and that might be a a part of the tour that you're going on, they're just have a different set of rules, and the people there will let you know if you're bugging them or something. And so you just have to be very polite and really move forward. And yeah, cultural sensitivity is very huge. And but like I
Do
said,
that research ahead of time to
yeah,
know. Yeah.
exactly, yeah, and that's what I would
Yeah.
give advice to. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that insight, Delbert. Since you mentioned kind of community engagement or workshops, I know you mentioned it, Ben, too, just to answer a question that we've got in the chat. Have either of you, either personally or at the organization, like needed to get special clearances to do those workshops in Europe or elsewhere, or has it been pretty open that like since you're a touring artist, like it's easy to add on those additional engagement opportunities, education opportunities alongside your work without getting additional clearances?
Uh, Me specifically, I haven't really ran into any, um, well, concerning like educational opportunities. They seem to be fairly open. I know I believe in New Zealand, and I don't know if it was a cultural school, but there was some situations where we had to ask their teacher or a mentor. It was a little more different than like an admin head or something, and I think it was more a cultural thing that we had to get the okay to be on the premises. Yeah.
Um, I was gonna was my answer to this. Yeah, most of the time when we do like a outreach or workshop thing, it's like baked into the project when we have done it. So we have not had to seek additional permissions or clearances on our own. Those have come through like whoever our host is.
Yeah.
Um, so I wish I knew more about that type of like self-producing in different countries, but I'm afraid I don't really.
Yeah.
Uh,
All good. I appreciate you both, attempting that response. We've, touched on how important relationships are for international touring. I know, Delbert, you've made a number of great contacts through, US based markets like the Western Arts Alliance Conference and the APAP conference in New York. But once you've made that connection, what cadence or types of communication have proven most sustainable for you both, so that you're constantly growing your connections and hopefully number of invitations abroad? How are you keeping these folks, connected to you instead of letting those relationships die off?
Um, I'll jump into this. So I think that part of my job is I just consider sort of donor and business cultivation. So I spend time every day reaching out to one donor at least or one presenter at least. Um, and most of the time that's not necessarily like a hey, hire us, or hey, fund this project. Most of the time it's something that I sort of call stewardship. A lot of this is sort of in the development world, and that can be anything from just a like a hey, I saw you were doing this thing, looks really great, good luck, or it could be an invitation to a concert, or we just had an album just come out, so I send them the link to the album. So I try to reach out to people in a somewhat regular basis. So some of these presenters we will maintain relationships with over many months. So it might be every couple of months uh, I'll reach out, or if I'm visiting a city that somebody happens to be in, I will ask them if they want to get coffee or something like that. Um, I would say my advice is just like fairly regular. If it's somebody that you have a close relationship with that knows you, it doesn't have to be like all the time, but making sure that you are up to date on what they're doing is always a really good sign. Is always a really good way to sort of maintain that relationship, because I think once you've built that trust, then getting to the next gig or performance or opportunity is just that much easier.
Delbert?
Yeah, so I kind of look at it as a sort of a two-path kind of thing. One is definitely on the network side. Anytime you're nearby, yes, make it a point to meet them in person. Kind of like Ben was saying, keeping up to date with them lets the presenter lets them know that you're interested and you're keeping an eye on their programming. It could be easily as sending an email and saying, I love that you booked so and so, this artist, kind of small talk, I guess you could call it, around what they've been doing. But on the other hand, on the artistic side of things, I have I guess you could say the primary thing that I'm booked for is the band, but I also have what you would call modules. I also have a trio all the way down to an individual artist, meaning, four or five different projects. And when I meet a presenter, I don't offer just like a one show. I ask for a long-term relationship in terms of maybe this first year I can come in and introduce myself to your community, your area, and maybe skip a year and maybe you can, hire our duo. But we tend to set sort of these projects out in a timeline of I try to do within 10, 10 years time frame. That way, you're booked for 10 years basically. But not every year, because a lot of times most presenters like to skip a year unless you have a really good relationship. They might want to bring you in every year for something. But it's good to have different sort of projects available of your work as well, because they're not going to book our quartet year after year, but they would book our quartet one year. They would bring me in the next year as a soloist, and then maybe the next year we could talk about a different project. So I think that when you come to a presenter with a plan like that, most of them are very shocked. They'll be like, wow, we never been offered this type of thing before. But it's important to kind of put your foot forward and tell them that you're interested in a long-term relationship, because I think the idea right now is kind of like, one and done, and we're never gonna speak with each other again. But that's how I've been able to sort of sustain this career that I have is. When I talked about the two paths, network wise, I'm always there, and then on the artistic side, I has something available for them. That's not always the same thing. So I kind of like diversify a little bit and have options, for the presenters to continue our relationship.
Great, thank you both. We are getting towards the end of the hour, so if folks have questions for our panel, please feel free to raise your hand. You can also unmute or just type your question in the chat. And sorry about raised hand, I mean virtual hand, of course. But I guess to kind of get us here to the end, potentially, I'd be interested in just hearing like, what is it about international touring that keeps you both coming back? Why is taking your ensembles abroad such an important priority for you, and what do you find are the benefits that make you want to keep on doing it? Go ahead, Delbert. The stare off.
All right, yeah, yeah. So for me, it's the reaction that we get from the audience or whoever it is that we're performing for. Something that has kept me coming back is the I think I have a strong relationship with the youth overseas, just because a lot of the youth that we perform for have never heard live music ever, maybe in three situations that we've been in, and for them to hear our quartet, who is so modern and have influences from not only indigenous chant, but also from like modern jazz and funk. That has to be mind-blowing to someone who just like that was their first musical experience. Yeah, they sing songs and different things, but when you see sort of the reaction to it, and it's very that's kept me really wanting to do it more for the youth. But the other thing is just it's so beautiful to be in a different area that have different customs, and you start to learn from how people are living and how different artists abroad, how they're doing in their careers, and what their paths are. And so when you meet those, you can kind of, when you come back, it's really, you can unpack all of these stories and really start to get find influence from these situations, and it can really shape your artistic practice too if you let it. And so I think it's always seems like a wild card, but most of the situations have been very positive and very influential on not only myself but the rest of our band. And so that's what keeps me back is that just finding the being in new places, and definitely the youth reaction. Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. And then we can get to some of the questions we've got in the chat.
I mean, I think it's just really inspiring. It's really inspiring. It gives you like new eyes, right, or new ears, because it's just a different context for music making, a different context for practicing your music. You get to learn how other people just do things differently, and the benefit has been enormous. Has just really given so much more richness to the work that we do and to the experiences that we have. So for us, it's always an important investment in ourselves as artists and also in our organization.
Do you find too that like by performing abroad that it makes your work in the US, that it impacts specifically the work in the US or your relationships in the US, touring in the US in any way? Like, are there concrete impacts as well? Though I also agree wholeheartedly on just like how meaningful it is to perform in an international context. But are there those kind of concrete impacts you find organizationally in the US?
Yes, I mean one very specific one that I can name. There is a presenter in New York that focuses on music of the Americas, and so when we have traveled throughout Mexico and Argentina and Sao Paulo, that has helped us perform at that place in particular. And then certainly our albums have evidence of our different travels, our touring program, just about everything. And then the more you have those experiences, the more specialized your work becomes, and that becomes a greater case to make for people to hire you in the future.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ben. For the questions we've got in the chat, we've got a question from Rory. I've never been to APAP. Paying to play always sounded suspect to me, but I'm wondering, are Ben and Delbert doing performances at APAP or just going to speak with people they run into?
That's a great question, and pay to play literally only works if you have the network first. If you just go to pay to play, it's very hard to get people to your showcase, especially presenters, those who are booking. I would suggest going to APAP maybe a year or two before and just completely focusing on networking, meeting people, letting them know. After a year or two, then doing a pay to play show could be very worth it. Um, there are things involved with APAP, such as money, registration, hotel, travel, all of these things. So what I've been able to do is some of the regional work that we get, we do have a little savings account that we push a certain percentage over of every show. That way we can go to APAP and Western Arts Alliance each year. It's a long game thing, and these things but also, when you think about it, if you do land a gig at APAP or Western Arts Alliance, most of the time it's not your average club that are there. They're more like performing arts centers or major festivals. And so, and there's nothing wrong within the club level. There's a lot of people who can make their career in in the club levels and different things, and like smaller festivals. But I think APAP is more focused around, and Western Arts Alliance, they're more performing arts centers. So usually one of those gigs would cover the expenses for the year that you spent on some of these conferences that you go to. But I would definitely not pay to play if you don't know the market yet or don't know anyone there at the festival, because that's it's all the Western Arts Alliance has more of a juried showcase, which they do tend to push all the presenters toward your performance, but APAP is all individual showcasing, meaning you do the work to get the people there.
Yeah, there's a lot happening all at the same time. What about you, Ben? That question.
Um, yeah, in for conferences in general, I tend to think about conferences to mostly reinforce existing relationships that we have, or to have an excuse to see somebody that I already know. So it's like when I went to APAP in January, and I ended up meeting a number of people in New York because because I went to APAP, but who are not going to the festival, the conference itself. So a lot of times, another one we go to is Chamber Music America. And so these are conferences where there are a number of people who I have relationships with, or have maybe they've sort of fallen off the radar, and I'll reach out and I'll say, hey, it's nice to see that you're there. It'd be great to meet up. And so you have a reason to reach out to these folks. And so I think about those really more as not necessarily pay to play, but having a relatively convenient way to put your face in front of other people's.
Yeah, and I just add to that it is an investment and it can make sense depending on where you are in your career. We've named APAP, Western Arts Alliance Conference, and the Chamber Music Society Conference, but there are others too that might be a stronger fit for whatever specific genre or discipline you're in. Like there's if touring Europe is a big focus for you, and your music falls within the kind of like global or world music kind of genre. Like Womex is a huge conference that happens every year in Europe. That's very relational. That the like actual registration fee isn't as high as some of the American conferences. And so like doing that type of investment can make sense depending on your situation. So like there's also, I know an international like woodwind society that I hear from certain ensembles that fit in that vein, where they find that like it's absolutely necessary for them to be there every year. So find your niche, find a conference that fits within that niche and do some research, connect with people who've been there first and hear from them how it's worked, how they make sure that they get the kind of return on investment because it is, a lot of money, especially if you're flying internationally to attend a conference. But if international is your primary view and where you really want to get, then, I think potentially going to a conference outside the US might be a good way to do that too, where you really are interfacing with a lot of international presenters.
Can I jump in one
Yeah,
quick thing about that? Um, that just made me think of. I think it's really important, as you mentioned, Andrew, to reach out to somebody who's been to the conference because each conference has its own little like micro culture.
it does.
So like for example, at APAP, there are a lot of people who are like around the conference who have meetings but who don't actually attend the conference, who like meet with people who are at the conference but then meet in the cafe next door. And so sometimes it's like helpful to learn how each conference has its own little internal dynamic, because maybe you could go and not have to like pay to be in the thing, but also get some of the benefit of being there. And I just think it's worthwhile to do that kind of research ahead of time because it could really help steer your experience one way or another.
Absolutely. Yeah, very, very true. Delbert,
I
did you have
also
something
want
to add? Yeah.
Yeah, just really quick. APAP and Western Arts Alliance are only two, and I've been at a workshop at Western Arts Alliance, and I think from counting the sheet, there's something like over 35 similar conferences, but more regional. So that we're just basically talking about I think the two biggest that happen, in the United States, and so there are a lot more, definitely a lot more music conferences elsewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Delbert, I do have a question here, especially for you from Nikki. Did you have a niche and the multiple options developed from the very start of your international performing career, or how did you start out? You just keep that a little short. I'm sure you've got a long story too for how
Yeah.
you got started out, but
Yeah. At the very beginning, before we started, we had a national sales director as a drummer. And so he was telling us about the market early on. And so we thought instead of just playing standard jazz standards, that we would be more of an original band coming from melodies that are inspired from my culture. So we kind of saw that before everything started. So we were already set that way from the beginning, and it just began to grow. And obviously, it changes as you grow, as anything else. But yeah, we already had it at the very beginning, but we had that education that we needed to be different, from the get go. Yeah.
thank you, Delbert. Well, I just want to quickly thank our panel for taking part today, for sharing their stories and experience. I really just appreciate you joining and sharing all of that with us today. We do have additional sessions available on our website that are recorded. This will be shared next week. Just thanks so much for attending.